Bonjour à tous and welcome back to the channel. My name is Stephane and this is the French Cooking Academy. Today we are doing an interesting exercise. We're gonna learn how to make a brown stock from scratch in the style of Escoffier. Now this is following a discussion I had already telling everyone that making your own stock from scratch, absolutely from scratch, was really time consuming and not really suited for home. However, many of you really asked me, you need to show us how to make it from scratch. So I'm going to take you today through the whole process, using the books, showing you the recipe in there, and we're going to see how involved making your own brown stock at home is. Stay tuned. Alright, so let's start. So today I really wanted to be really transparent and take you along on the process of making something from scratch. Now in this instance we're talking about brown stock, but if you claim that you want to make something from scratch in French cooking and you want to do it by the book, you need to do it using a reference book. This is where it all starts. Okay, so I am using the Auguste Escoffier Culinary Guide. You can get the English version, I've got the link on the video description, but this is what I'm using as a base to help me. We're gonna go through the recipe. So this is where you start with. You've got some instructions. Then comes the produce. Fresh bones, all the necessary vegetables, the pans, the cookware. I'm using here already a roasting tray made of aluminium because it's got the best heat distribution, gets really hot, it's perfect for bone roasting. That's something we need to know. When you make stock, you also need a stock pot. This is the smallest size you can get for home, which is 10 liters. It is a lot. But enough talk, now I'm going to take you through the recipe. Let's open the book and see what it says. Alright, so this is the French version of the Escoffier brown stock recipe. If you have the English version you can follow along, otherwise I'm going to translate and summarize. Here it says brown stock, also called estouffade, and the proportion given in the recipe are for 10 liters. So just to give you an example what I'm going through, when I'm making recipes, I need to transform this into a 2-liter recipe suited for home. That makes more sense. And this part here is only the process of making the stock, which is actually not very complicated. It's just time consuming. Yeah? So it just says first that we need to roast the bones in the oven, then add some carrots, some onions, pour some water over the bones and leave that to cook for 12 hours. And then we get the initial bone broth, right? that kind of bone stock. Once you've got that, you make then a second stock, which is the final stock, using just the pieces of meat that you're gonna put in a pan, pour that other stock that you've made previously over, and again leave to reduce and concentrate to get that beautiful product. And this is the process of layering the flavor. That's very important to remember, using stock to make stock. And this is, people have been asking me, why are you using stock to make stock? This is the answer. So now that we've looked at this, let's start the recipe. Now, the first step consists of roasting the bones in the oven and give them a light coloration. So it is important to use the right type of material. I'm using here an aluminium roasting tray, which is about, I think, 25 centimeters, 10 inches that way to 35 to 14 inches that way. And I'm using aluminium because this is what really gets hot. When it comes to layering the meat, the bones in there, make sure they just fit the space. Too many empty space, your juice are gonna burn. Too much bones on top, it's not gonna roast. So I'm gonna place this in a middle tray in the oven at about 428 Fahrenheit, which is about like 220 degrees Celsius, and leave them to roast until they get a nice brownish coloration. No oil, no salt, no pepper. Once the bones start to color, it is important to turn them around using one of these tongs. So you make sure you go around and turn them over from time to time to make sure they get an even color everywhere. And now for the aromatics. So I've reconverted all the amounts from 10 liters to 2 liters, and this is the end result. You only need to have 1 diced carrot, 1 diced onion, which is 150 grams each, a bouquet garni made with parsley stalk, bay leaves and thyme, and a garlic clove. Very simple. But it does raise the question, do you actually think that the bones that I've got in the oven, mixed with a carrot and an onion and a bouquet garni, added with liters of water, is really gonna give you a great flavored stock? Because this is, by the way, what you see in a lot of videos. People tell you, oh, just roast some bones, you add the aromatics, pour water, leave it to cook, and you get something great. You're not. It is not possible because bones don't have much taste. you know, and a carrot and an onion, you're not going to get something amazing out of that neither. And this is why Escoffier is doing this method of layering the flavors, because he knows that the bones are not very noble. You're not going to get much flavor out of it, but we do extract the bit of flavor we can. And then we're going to be using this with noble pieces of meat, of pork, of beef, that's going to give you this great intense flavor. So remember, it's the layering of flavor that gives you great things. Okay, so your bones are ready. What's left to do only is sprinkle some carrots, onion, which is the Mirepoix, as we call it. And then you're going to mix this with the oil and put this back for a few minutes in the oven. After 5 minutes in the oven, your carrots and onion are already cooked, and now we're going to put the bones in. So stock pot, and you put all of the bones at the bottom. Once all the bones are in, you add all the carrots and onion. You then mix the whole lot a little bit. Finally, before you pour the water in, you're going to put that tray back in the oven to caramelize all the juices, and then we're going to just deglaze with a bit of water and add that in the pan. Alright, my pan is hot out of the oven. What do we mean by deglazing? Just take some water and you detach all of the juices with a little bit of water. That's all it is. And we're going to pour this in the pan. So for the liquid, you add these first juices in, and then we're going to top it up with water. When it comes to the water, you're going to just pour enough water to barely cover the bone. This is how much water, so it depends on your pan, on all kinds of factors. Just cover the bones. A little bit more, and that's about it. From here, put the heat on. You're throwing your garlic, your Bouquet Garni, and we're going to leave this to cook for many hours. Sorry for the change of angle here, but I really want to show you that shot about the stock pot and where it should be placed. So in terms of time, I said we're going to leave this to cook for many hours. This has to be simmering for 5 to 6 hours, very long time. And this is why a stock pot usually is placed at the back of the stove, and because it's very tall, it's very cumbersome. So putting it at the back like this, you can still use your burner and you can still go about your cooking day without being disturbed by that big pot. So we're going to leave this to cook for 5 to 6 hours. When this is done, we're going to be able to move on to the second section of the stock making from Escoffier, which is the actual brown stock making using the meats. It's been more than 6 hours and my bone broth is ready, and I wanted to show you, if I can grab one of these bones here, I wanted to show you that, look at this. The bones have been totally stripped down of all the nutrients, collagen, fat and anything that was on there. So you're going to discard the bones and put them in another container, and we're going to filter that stock using a strainer and put it in another pan. But before we do that, it's important to look at the situation here and ask yourself the question, why on earth are we going out in a shop to a butcher to buy bones, put them in water like that, and try to get some scraps of meat that is left over on a piece of bone? It does not really make sense. You know, why would you even do that? Especially when we're going to start a second stock afterwards using the fresh pieces of meat. You know, and this is because Escoffier, the types of recipe, are meant for a restaurant. So when we're making this at home, it makes no sense whatsoever, because why would you go outside and buy bones in the first place? But if you look at the restaurant perspective, what Escoffier was doing, they will get a slab of beef that the butcher in the restaurant would detail. You will get all the fillet steak, the T-bone steak, all the steaks preparing for the service, and you will be left with a carcass. So instead of throwing away these bones in that scenario, it makes perfect sense then to use all the bones, put them in a big stock pot like that, and make some kind of broth that you can reuse to make an even better stock. Okay? Anyway, moving on, like I said, you're gonna take all of your juice and pass it through fine mesh strainer. Beautiful, look at this color. So we now have what Escoffier would call the bone broth, and we are going to move on to the second part, which is making the actual brown stock. Big difference there. So the second part of the brown stock making by Escoffier is quite interesting. It uses only fresh pieces of meat, there's no more bones. I'm using some veal chunks, chuck beef here, pork belly and pork rind. And we're gonna brown those and use that broth to make our stock. So let's have a look how to make that. Okay, so the first step consists of browning the meats. I'm going to use the fatty bits of the pork first in a bit of butter. You can use oil as well, just run out of oil, so I'm just going to use those. Put the pieces of meat and we're going to leave them to brown a little bit. So browning the meats on either side, refrain from moving them around, and you have to leave them to sit like that until they get a bit of a brownish color. So once they're brown on one side, turn them over. So when the meats are brown, we're going to do the interesting part of the stock making from Escoffier, which is this. To pour the broth over your meat, just enough so that it covers the meat, bring it to the boil, and we're going to reduce that up to a glazing point, and we have to repeat that process 2 or 3 times. So today we're going to do it 2 times. I'm going to leave this to reduce to a glaze. So now that our stock is reducing, we can talk about the degrees of concentration, and this is really not often you will have the chance to see that. And so you see we've poured the stock to start with, we're reducing it, and now we've reached the point of a demi-glaze. When people ask me always, what should be a demi-glaze? Well, this is this. You see that semi-syrupy kind of consistency. It's extremely concentrated, it's brown, but the glaze, it's even further than that, thicker and even more syrupy, and I will show you this when it's done. Shortly after, we've entered the glaze territory, and this is almost a caramel of a sauce. So I've turned the heat off to show you, look at that. Look at the coating power of that thing. You see? It almost does not even flow anymore from the actual spoon. You know, it is basically almost like a caramel. So as you can see, the glaze is like a caramel, and this is the first glazing we're doing. The next step consists, of course, of repeating the process another time. So you do the same, you cover your meat and you reduce to a glaze. Remember that Escoffier is doing this 3 times in a row. It's crazy. We're going to do this 2 times. When the second glazing is ready, you can finally pour over the rest of your broth all over in there to actually start to cook the stock, as it's so called. So Escoffier says in his book that you need to leave this to cook now until all the flavors from the meat has been totally extracted to the point that the meat won't have any culinary values. In my head, that will translate into another hour before we discard the meat, filter the stock one last time, and we will be done. Okay, so it's been 2 hours. I've said 1, but I left it for 2 hours. I've filtered my stock and discarded the meat, and this is the end result of the Escoffier brown stock. It's a nice brown color. I've tasted it. It's got that intense beefy flavor to it, and it is not a sauce. Remember, this is just a base stock for Escoffier. So I took some samples, and we're gonna compare the initial bone broth and the final brown stock before we wrap things up. Let's wrap things up on this shot here and the comparison of the 2 stages, the 2 layers of flavor. This is the initial bone broth we've made, and you see that blonde color, and adding that second layer with the glazing of the juices and everything, that gives you that which is the brown stock from Escoffier. It's an amazing stock, but again, really, is it suited for home? As you can see, I don't really think so. Because of the time and the constraints, but it is interesting to see the process in real life, and if you're in a culinary school, for instance, just to see how it goes, how it looks like. So this is the 2 different colors, bone broth, brown stock, or estouffade. In terms of conservation, you can keep the stock frozen up to 3 months if you like, and this is exactly what I'm going to do, because I'm going to use that same stock for next week's video, where I'm going to transform the brown stock into a sauce espagnole, that very famous tomatoey type of sauce. I hope you can join me then. And until then, well, have a good day. Bye bye.